explorators, welcome back to day 24 of the city of Ember. Grab a snack, find a comfy spot, and we're going to find out what's happened with Dune and Lena. She should be hurrying to join him, but a sadness held her back like a heavy stone in her chest. She bent her face into the palms of her hand and pressed hard against her closed eyes. How could she go away from Ember and leave Poppy behind? Because if she went, she must leave Poppy behind, mustn't she? How could she take her on a journey of such danger? The song of the river startled her when it began, the men's voices low and rolling, swelling with power, and then the women's voices coming in above with a complicated melody that seemed to fight the current. Lena listened, unable to move. The song of the river made her uneasy. It always had. With its rolling, relentless rhythm, it seemed to urge her onward, saying, "Go down, go away, go now." The more she listened, the more she felt like the motion of the river in her stomach, a churning, sickening feeling. Then came the song of the darkness, the last of the three songs, and the one filled with the most longing and majesty. The soul of Ember was in this song. Its tremendous chord held all the sorrow and all the strength of the people in the city. The song reached its climax, darkness like an endless night, sang the hundreds of voices so powerfully the air seemed to shiver. And at that moment, the lights once more went out. The voices faltered, but only for an instant. Then they rose again in the darkness, stronger even than before. Lena sang too. She stood up and sang with all her might into the deep, solid blackness. The last notes echoed and faded into a terrible silence. Lena stood utterly still. Will it end like this, she thought, at the finish of the last song. She felt the cold stone of the clock tower behind her back. She waited. Then an idea came to her that made her skin prickle. What if she were to shout into the silence right now? What if she were to say, "Listen, people, we found the way out of Ember. It's the river. We go on the river." She could announce the astounding news, just as she and Dune had planned to do. And then what would happen? Would the guards rush to the roof and seize her? Would the people in the square think her news was just a child's wishful thinking? Or would they listen and be saved? She could feel the words pushing upward in her throat. She wanted so much to say them. She took a deep breath and leaned forward. But before she could speak, a rumble of voices arose below. Someone shouted, "Don't move," and someone else shrieked. The rumble rose to a roar, and then cries flew up into the darkness from everywhere. The crowd was erupting into a panic. There was no hope of being heard now. Lena clutched the edge of the clock tower as if the tumult below might cause her to fall. She strained her eyes against the darkness. Without light, she could go nowhere. "Lights, come back on," she prayed. "Come back on." Then she saw something. At first, she thought her eyes were tricking her. She closed them tightly and opened them again. It was still there, a tiny point of light, moving. As she watched, it moved along slowly in a straight line. Then it turned and moved in a straight line again. Was it on River Road? She couldn't tell, but suddenly she knew what it was. It was Dune, with a candle. Dune, going towards the pipeworks in the dark. And she wanted to go too. She could feel it all through her, the urge to run and meet him and find the way out of Ember to the new place. She listened to the shouts and wails of the terrified people in the square below. She thought of Mrs. Murdo down there in the dark, being bumped and pushed, with her arms wrapped tightly around Poppy, trying to protect her, and all at once everything seemed so clear. Lena knew what she would do. If only the lights would come back on, if only the light was not the very last blackout in the history of Ember. Watching the tiny light following its steady course, she made a wish with the whole force of her heart and mind. Then the floodlights flickered. There was a great cry of hope from the crowd, and the lights came on and stayed on. Lena ran to the back edge of the roof, dropped easily down onto the roof of the prison room, and, seeing no guards in the crowd that was now streaming into the street, she jumped from there to the ground and joined the throng of people. She made her way down Greystone Street, going at the same pace as everyone else so she wouldn't stand out. When she came to the trash can enclosure behind the great gathering hall, she squatted down and hid. Her heart was beating fast, but she felt strong and purposeful now. she had her plan. As soon as she spotted Mrs. Murdo and Poppy on their way home, she'd put it into action. At 3:20, Dune took his pillowcase, left the school by the back door, and started up Pibb Street. He went fast. The lights had gone out for a few minutes just before 3, and he was nervous about being outside. He planned to take the long way to the pipeworks, out at the very edge of the city, to avoid any guards that might still be looking for him. He was filled with dread for Lena. He wouldn't know what had happened to her until he got to the pipeworks, and she either showed up or didn't. All he could do now was run. He raced down Nack Street. It was strange to be out in the city with the streets so utterly deserted. Without people passing back and forth, the streets seemed wider and darker. Nothing moved but himself, his shadow, and his fleeting reflection in window shops he passed. In Silverton Square, he saw a kiosk where the poster with his and Lena's names on it had been pinned up. Everyone in the city must have seen these posters by now. He was famous, he thought wryly, but not in the way he wanted. There would be no glorious moment on the gathering hall steps after all. Instead of making his father proud, he had caused him to fill with dreadful worry. This thought made him so sad that his knees felt suddenly wobbly. How could he just vanish without a word? But it was too late now. He couldn't go back. If only there was some way to send his message. And in a moment he realized there was. He stopped, fished in his pack for the paper and pencil he had brought, and scribbled on it, "Father, we have found the way out. It was in the pipeworks after all. You will know all about it tomorrow. Love, Dune." He folded this into quarters, wrote "Delivered to Loris Harrow" in big letters on the outside, and pinned it to the kiosk. There. That was the best he could do. He would have to trust that someone delivered it. In the distance he heard the faint sound of singing. He listened. It was the song of the river, just ending, far below, like the blood of the earth from the center of nowhere rushing forth. He sang under his breath. Like everyone in Ember, he knew the words of the 3 songs by heart. He sang along softly with the faraway singers, making the light for the lamps of Ember, older than anyone can remember, faster than anything knows how. The river comes and the river goes. Up Rim Street, now to River Road, he was halfway there. The singers were starting on the Song of Darkness. It was his favorite, with its powerful deep harmonies. He was a little sorry to be missing it. He went up the Pot Street side of empty River Road Square, where another poster hung crookedly onto the kiosk, and he was headed up toward North Street when suddenly the lights flickered and went out. He jolted to a stop. Stand still and wait. That was his automatic response. In the distance he heard a dip in the sound of the singing, some startled voices breaking in the flow, but then the songs rose again, defying the darkness. For a moment, all thoughts vanished from Dune's mind. There was nothing but the fearless words of the song. Black as sleep and deep as dreaming, darkness like an endless night, yet within the streets of Ember, bright and bravely shines our light. He sang, standing still in the blackness. When the song ended, he waited. The lights would surely come back soon. For a few moments there was silence, and then, far away but piercingly clear, he heard a scream. More screams and shouts followed, the sounds of panic. He felt the panic himself, like a hand taking hold of him, making him want to leap up and fling himself against the darkness. But suddenly, with a flash of joy, he remembered. He didn't have to wait for the lights to come back on. He had what no citizen of Ember had ever had before, a way to see in the dark. He set his pack down, untied the knot at the top, and groped around inside until he felt the candle. Down in a corner, he found the little packet of matches. He scraped a match against the pavement. It flared up instantly. He held the flame to the string on the candle, and the string began to burn. He had a light. He had the only light in the entire city. The candle didn't cast its light very far, but it was enough to see at least the pavement in front of him. He went along slowly along Pot Street, then turned left on North Street. At the end of the street was the wall of the Pipeworks office. When he got to the Pipeworks entrance, no one was there. A little cloud of moths came fluttering around the flame on his candle, but otherwise nothing moved in Plumber Square. There was nothing to do but wait. Dune blew out the candle. He didn't want to use it all up in case the lights stayed off for a long time. And he squatted down on the pavement, setting down his bundle, leaning against one side of the trash cans. He waited, listening to the distant shouts. And at last, the lights blinked again, and came on. Lena was nowhere in sight. If the guards had found her and taken her, but Dune preferred not to think about that yet. He would wait for a while. She would have been delayed by the blackout if she were on her way. He couldn't see the clock tower from here, but it was probably not quite 4 o'clock. What if she didn't come? The singing was over, the people were dispersing throughout the city, and the guards no doubt would soon resume their search for him. Dune clasped his arms together and pressed them hard against his stomach, trying to stop the queasy fluttering. If she didn't come, Dune had 2 choices. He could stay in the city and do what he could to save Lena, or he could go on the boat by himself and hope Lena could somehow free herself and tell the people of Ember about the way out. He didn't like either of these plans. He wanted to go down on the river, and he wanted Lena to go too. Dune stood up and hoisted his sack again. He was too restless to keep sitting. He walked down to Gapery Street and looked in both directions. Not a single person in sight. He walked to Plumber Square Street, thinking that perhaps Lena was coming by the edge of the city, as he had to avoid being seen, but no one was there. He didn't even see anyone when he went past Subling Street to the very end of the city. He had to decide what to do. He went and stood in the doorway of the pipeworks. Think, he said to himself, think. He was not even sure he could make the journey by himself. How would he get the boat into the water? Could he lift it without help? On the other hand, how could he help Lena if she was in the hands of the mayor's guards? What could he possibly do that would not get himself caught too? He felt sick. His hands were cold. He stepped out of the doorway and scanned the square once again. Nothing moved but the moths around the lights. And that's where we're going to stop today, 5th graders. Tune in tomorrow to find out if Lena makes it.